All right, guys, let's see. So, any thoughts? Any ideas? How do we do this? How do we, so the, okay. Okay, so you're thinking, okay, so that's an interesting idea. So you're going to create a Boolean, exception occurred. We'll just call it that. And we'll say false for now, right? And what did you say? And make it true inside the catch block. X equals true. And then if X let's say if no exception occurred, then we assert. So let me do it this way. Something like this is what I think you're trying to say. Oh, so, you're saying just assert X equals false. Something like this. Okay, and then delete this. No. Because it does equal false. We want to assert that it equals true. All right, okay, so yeah, so it failed. It failed because the exception did not occur. Right? It's okay. Well, let's see. Well, this is good though. This is good. This failed the test case because an exception should have occurred. Same thing here, but we'll get to that one in just a moment. So remember that our failed test case was the 103. Okay. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to put our exception back in. And we're going to make sure that now 103 passes. Because we do want to make sure that if an exception is there, that it passed. There it is. 103 passed. All right. So that was a very good solution. You were definitely thinking through things. Okay. There's another solution that I would think of as well. This is good. It does what you want it to do. Right. There's nothing wrong with the solution. This is a correct solution that Rajep has suggested to us. The way that I personally would do this, and I don't want to spend too much time on this particular problem, but I want to present an alternative option, is basically what we want. Let me go back and put that back out, commented. Okay. Is what we want to happen is that we want an exception to occur on this line, right? We want something to happen on this line that will throw us into this section, which means anything after this line should not execute. Right? But what if we get to a line after this? It means an exception did not happen here, right? So what we could do is we could put something like this here. And what's going to happen is that if no exception is encountered here, then this line will execute, which will cause our test case to fail. Right, there it is. Same thing with right here, right? So for these two, this 103, 104, both of these failed, right? And if I uncomment those lines, and run my test cases now they pass. And the reason they pass is because an exception was encountered here, which then skipped this line, so it didn't happen. An exception encountered here, which went straight to here. And then this made sure that the balance was correct, that the balance had stayed 0. Okay. We could also do something like this. Where we want to make sure, oh, it's not instance, it's not a capital O. All right. Okay. And then that way we can check to make sure that the correct exception was thrown. Because let's say, for example, back here, let's say they named the exception incorrectly. Let's just take a in off of it here. That actually won't work, I don't think. Oh, wait a second. Okay, if I do this, and I bet it's going to give me an error. No, maybe not. Okay. Right. So now I have a failed test case here. Why? Because it's not an instance of the correct exception class. Right. So we can check a few different things here. Right. An exception was encountered, but it was not the correct exception. All right. All right. So just because an exception occurs does not mean that the correct exception was thrown. All right. So let's return this back to the way that it should be. Okay. All right. Okay, good. So we're passing. All right. Because there's one more thing about testing that I want to go over. And this is again where we as programmers, we like past test cases. But we as testers, we like failed test cases because it means we found something. We found something that wasn't right. So let's take this, and I'm going to change one thing. I'm going to change this, get account number. Is this code right? Is this program written correctly? No. But if I run this test, I pass all my test cases. But I passed all my test cases. What's wrong with my code? All right. Right, if I change this. So does that mean that I have to go and change my test cases all the time? I gotta do this now? No, wait. All right. It failed. All right. So that mean I need to change that? Oh, that's not good. Oh, I spelled constructor wrong. None of y'all told me I spelled constructor wrong. The thing I want to put out there is just because your test cases pass does not mean the code is correct. Okay. Just because your test cases fail does not mean that the code is wrong. Right? This is why we have to do both write good code and we must also write good test cases. So as it is right now, this test for the methods that we have written for withdrawal and deposit, they're not bad. They're pretty good, but you should at least write a second. Let me do this and put that here. Like that. And now you have two different tests of the same thing, right? Two different values. That way, if somehow we accidentally did something like this, right, we would know, right? We would know that this should fail one of my test cases. And there it is. It failed this one. So now if we go back and we change the code to what it should be, this, and we run this. All right. Right. So failed test cases don't always mean the code is bad. It could be that the test case is bad, but hopefully your test cases are good. Right. Passed test cases don't always mean the code is right. It could be that the test case and the code is bad. Right. But if we've written the test cases well, separate from the code, like the thing is one of the things is you don't want to necessarily write them side by side because then there's, could be a problem with that. And this has a lot to do with one of the things that I said I was going to talk about that I really don't have a lot of time to go into it too in depth. But this was why I had my job as a tester when I started off in software development, is because I did what we called black box testing, which meant I didn't know what the code looked like. I only knew what the user interface looked like. I only knew how the user was going to interact with the system. And so I tested it like a user would test it. I tested it in a way that I didn't know what the inside of the code looked like. I didn't know, what this stuff looked like. I just knew what our expected output was from a particular input. So my test cases were developed separate from the code. And so what that meant was when I encountered an error, it was usually something that the programmer had not anticipated. The programmer, he would write his own test cases, right? He would write his own tests of his code, but he wrote test cases using what we call white box testing, which meant he knew what the code looked like. He knew what this was. He knew how it was supposed to work, how it was supposed to interact. Right? And so when he tested it and all of his tests passed, he said, it's all working, it's all good. And then when I tested it and something failed, he would tell me, well, you're testing it wrong. Well, why am I testing it wrong? Well, it worked for me. Okay. And I'll give you an example of something that happened, and I'll end with this story. I'll end our time today with this story. One of the times that we, one thing I was testing a search page. I was testing a search page for our system. And one of the things we could search by was dollar amounts. You could type into a field a particular dollar amount and search for documents that were in a certain range, like between $100 and $500, for these documents or whatever. And the way the field was supposed to work was you typed in a number, and then it would search all the documents for that number. In fact, what I will do is I will share so you can kind of get an idea of what this looked like. Let me share my whiteboard screen over here. Screen, where are you? All right, so the field, it looked like it looked like this on the page with the nice little search button or whatever it was. This was 20 years ago, so I don't remember all this, right? But our nice programmer had put this $sign out front of the field, okay, expecting that they would type in, something like, $1,000 or whatever, and they would click search, and then it would search, and everybody would be happy. That's what he expected. Well, on comes this tester, this fresh out of university tester. And what does he do? What do I do? Well, I said, well, what happens if somebody types in this? Right? And then I clicked search. And you know what happened? I got this Oracle error on the page. I got, let me see if I can find an example. I can't find one off. Man. Here we go. Something like this. I should just share the whole page actually here. Let's see. show the whole screen. All right, so something like this, we had a server error. So I click on the search and I get this big server error. And the programmer, and I submit this as a bug report, and the programmer says, you can't do that because you can't put special characters in there because this is supposed to be a numeric field. And I said, yeah, I get that, but if the user types in something like this, it's not a good thing for them to get a big server error. And he said, well, but no user would ever type that in. Let me tell you from personal experience, a user will type that in. At some point, a user will type in something. A user, this isn't even the worst thing that what some user would do in a field like this. Some user would do something like this, would type in, 100. Right? They'll type in the word 100 in there and expect this to work. Mm-hmm. Users do crazy things sometimes. Mm-hmm. So he needed to check, okay, how do I take this and do what it's supposed to do? How do I cleanly get out of this? Okay. But that was something that he had not tested for. But me, having been someone that did not know what was inside of this code, did not know that the code took this and tried to make it into a number automatically. I didn't know that because I was doing black box testing. So when I type this in, I get this big server error. And what he did was he fixed it. He fixed this problem. I think the solution for us for this particular problem was if a user typed special characters or anything that was not numeric in here, that we basically displayed a little red message under here. This field must contain a number or something like that. Yeah. Another option would have been for him to look at this and say, okay, well, let's just get rid of that, right? Let's use the program to strip off any special characters and see if the rest is a number. Yeah, something like that. Many of you have dealt with problems because of this thing, right? Because of this comma right here, right? Because for me, the way that us Americans write numbers, we have a comma, a virgule, right, and a nukta, right, for our decimal point. The rest of the world doesn't do things that way, does it? And so there have been problems in terms of how to parse these numbers sometimes. And so we need both kinds of testing. We need programmers to do unit testing for the white box. We need testers to come in and do some black box testing to make sure that people who have not seen the inner workings of the code test it well and test it thoroughly. Okay. So for your test cases, all right, when you write your test cases, you need to make sure that you test well, that you test checking, right? Checking, is it done appropriately? Are parameters set appropriately? Does functionality work well? Testing if I should get an exception, do I get an exception? All right. This is all part of testing, and like I said, the additional slides about the additional testing discussion, if you're interested in some of that, like I said, I love testing. I think it's one of the most important things one of the most important parts of a software development process, but it's unfortunately oftentimes overlooked. but I think it's a very important part of what we do. And if you want to learn more about testing, there's that slide set that's available, and I encourage you to look at it. But your next assignment will be related to this. So go ahead and at least play around with the JUnit. Play around with getting this thing set up so that you can write your test cases. Try it on your assignment 2. Try writing test cases for your assignment 2 project so that you can get an idea of how you might go about testing it. All right. So that's our discussion on testing and how to set up JUnit. Next week we will have it's not file reading, it's binary input output, I think. And then also next week we will talk about the upcoming midterm. Okay, so I'll give you some midterm information on next week as well. All right, guys. Thank you for attending, and I hope that it was informative, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a good weekend, and I will see you in 7 days.